There's a reason some men stay in a woman's mind long after they're gone, and it's not what you've been told. Most people never see this rule, because once you do, you can't unsee it. Most men think winning a woman is about being funny, generous, or always saying the right thing, and that's exactly why they lose her attention so fast. It looks smart, it feels safe, but it makes you easy to forget. Machiavelli saw the game differently. He knew that attraction isn't built by pleasing someone, it's built by controlling the emotional space you leave behind. The goal isn't to be loved in the moment, it's to stay in her mind when you're not around. In this video, you'll learn dark psychological ideas inspired by Machiavelli that explain how influence truly works between men and women. No chasing her texts, no trying to impress, no begging for connection. These are quiet rules that work without showing effort. You'll learn how to become the man she can't fully understand, but also can't ignore. The kind of man whose absence feels louder than another man's attention. Listen carefully, because once this way of thinking clicks, you'll realize most men are playing the game backwards. And when you stop doing what everyone else does, you stop getting average results. And the uncomfortable truth is this: the men who try the hardest are remembered the least. Now, write this in the comments: I choose better standards. If you don't understand this, the outcome is always the same. No matter how confident or attractive you think you are, you become temporary, enjoyed, maybe even desired for a moment, but easily replaced the second something new appears. Most men never see this happening. They think losing her means they didn't give enough, didn't care enough, didn't try hard enough. So they double down: more attention, more reassurance, more availability. And that's exactly when their value collapses. Because attraction doesn't die from distance, it dies from safety without consequence. When a woman feels there is no cost to losing you, no tension in disrespecting you, no risk in pulling away, her emotions shut off. You become background, predictable, optional, and the worst part, she doesn't leave angry, she leaves indifferent. This is the danger Machiavelli warned about. Without the fear of loss, desire turns lazy. And once that happens, nothing you say or do can restore the balance, unless you understand how power actually works. Real power in dating isn't about getting a woman to like you more. It's about refusing to shrink yourself just to keep her comfortable. Most men think being good means being endlessly patient, endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, and they confuse tolerance with strength. But tolerance without standards is how you become easy to use. The moment you accept disrespect, broken promises, or casual games, you teach her that your presence has no price. And once your presence feels free, it starts to feel cheap. A man with control doesn't shout, doesn't lecture, doesn't beg to be treated right. He simply changes his behavior the instant a line is crossed. Not to punish, not to scare, but because he's not built to stay where he isn't valued. That's the difference. Most men argue for respect. Strong men live in a way that makes disrespect pointless. If she pulls away to see if you'll panic, you don't flood her phone. If she tests you with a sharp comment disguised as a joke, you don't smile like it didn't land, you pause, let it hang, and move on without rewarding it. If she cancels last minute and expects you to chase for reassurance, you don't make a speech, you make a note, and your effort adjusts. No drama, no revenge, just consequences that arrive quietly. And that quiet is what people feel. It tells her you aren't running on hunger, you're running on standards. That you can enjoy a woman without needing her. And that's what flips the whole dynamic, because neediness asks for permission, while self-respect sets the terms. The goal isn't to make her anxious. The goal is to make your time and attention mean something. When you're calm, consistent, and willing to walk away from what doesn't meet your values, you stop being an option she can keep on the shelf. You become a man she has to meet properly, or not at all. And that's where attraction gets serious, not because you played games, but because you didn't. You didn't barter your dignity for closeness. You didn't trade your boundaries for a moment of approval. You stayed steady. And in a world full of men who fold, steadiness stands out. Most men believe their intentions should speak for themselves, that being honest, loyal, and well-meaning will naturally be felt by the right woman. But that's not how attraction works. People don't respond to what you intend. They respond to what they experience in your presence. You can have strong values and genuine character, but if you carry yourself with hesitation, explain yourself too much, or move as if you're unsure of your place, none of that depth will land. Attraction begins before words. It starts in how you walk into a room, how long you pause before answering, how you handle pressure without rushing to smooth things over. This isn't about pretending to be someone else. It's about understanding that confidence is communicated, not announced. When you rush to clarify, overshare, or justify your actions, you give away leverage you didn't need to lose. Calm doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from being okay with not filling every silence. When you feel uncertain, you don't confess it, you slow down. When you feel irritated, you don't react, you choose your response. When you want to chase, you resist the urge and let time do the talking. Because stillness carries more weight than motion, and restraint signals strength better than any speech ever could. If this feels uncomfortable, that's a good sign. It means you're hearing something most men avoid. Let people see most of you, but not all of you. Familiarity without mystery flattens attraction. When everything about you is visible, predictable, and explained, there's nothing left for curiosity to work on. But when you leave space, when you don't rush to be fully understood, the imagination fills in the gaps. And what someone imagines often carries more emotional charge than what you could ever spell out. This is where presence becomes powerful. You don't need to impress. You don't need to convince. You need to be grounded enough that your energy doesn't bend with every emotional shift in the room. The man who can sit comfortably in silence, who doesn't rush to win approval, who moves with intention instead of urgency, naturally changes how he's perceived. Not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't need it. In a world where everyone is explaining themselves, the man who lets his behavior speak becomes hard to ignore. And once perception shifts, attraction follows, not because you asked for it, but because you allowed it to form on its own terms. Every woman tests consistency, not to create chaos, but to see whether the man in front of her holds his shape under pressure. The test isn't announced. It shows up as mixed signals, sudden distance, sharp humor, or emotional swings that invite you to overreact. Most men fail here because they mistake the test for a problem to solve. They explain, apologize, negotiate, or push harder, thinking effort will restore balance. Instead, it exposes instability. Strength without awareness turns into force, and awareness without strength turns into compliance. What actually works is the balance Machiavelli hinted at centuries ago. Firmness paired with restraint. One without the other collapses. If you respond to everything head-on, you become predictable and easy to provoke. If you only observe and never assert yourself, you fade into the background. The man who holds attention does both, but never at the same time. When emotions rise, he slows down. When a boundary is crossed, he doesn't argue, he acts. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. Silence becomes his pause, not his retreat. He lets moments reveal themselves before stepping in, and that patience keeps him from being pulled into someone else's emotional frame. At the same time, he doesn't tolerate repeated disrespect under the label of understanding. He doesn't confuse calm with passivity. When something matters, his response is decisive, not emotional. That contrast is what creates tension. She can't predict whether he'll engage or disengage, because his reactions aren't driven by impulse, they're driven by values. And values don't bend for mood. This balance is what most men miss. They either try to dominate every moment, which turns their presence into noise, or they stay so agreeable they disappear. But when strength is quiet and awareness is sharp, behavior starts to speak louder than words. She feels that he's paying attention without hovering, that he's present without chasing, that he's capable of stepping away without resentment, and that combination unsettles in the right way. Not because it feels unsafe, but because it feels solid. There's no emotional flailing to push against, no insecurity to exploit, no performance to reward. Just a man who observes, chooses, and moves when it matters. That's when respect locks in. Not because he demanded it, but because he proved he doesn't lose himself when tested. And the man who doesn't lose himself becomes hard to replace, because stability under pressure is rare. When you hold your ground without force and read the moment without reacting, you stop playing roles and start setting the tone. That's where influence begins, not in words, but in how little you need them. Control doesn't come from arguing someone into agreement. It comes from gently disrupting certainty and letting the mind do the work on its own. When a person feels completely sure of their beliefs, their emotions stay settled and closed. Nothing moves. Most men rush to agree, to validate, to prove they're on the same side, thinking harmony creates closeness. But certainty doesn't create attraction. Contrast does. Influence begins the moment a thought is interrupted, not attacked, just nudged slightly off balance. It's not about telling her she's wrong. It's about introducing a different angle without pushing for acceptance. She says something confidently, almost rehearsed. And instead of matching her energy or challenging it head-on, you respond calmly, almost casually, with a line that doesn't fully align. Not confrontational, not dismissive, just unexpected. Then you stop talking. That pause is where the shift happens, because now her mind keeps working even though the conversation moved on. She replays it, she weighs it, she wonders why it's stuck. That internal split where one part of her holds on to what she believes and another part starts questioning it, creates tension. And tension keeps emotions open. This isn't about persuasion through pressure. Pressure creates resistance. This is about suggestion through restraint. When you don't chase agreement, when you don't rush to be understood, your words carry more weight because they weren't trying to land. Silence after a statement gives it room to echo. Most men talk too much, explain too much, soften everything so it's easily digestible. But the mind doesn't linger on what's easy. It lingers on what's unresolved. When you leave something slightly unfinished, slightly unclear, curiosity fills the gap. She starts turning it over on her own, and the moment she does that, your influence grows without effort. You're no longer competing for attention, you're occupying thought. That's the difference. You don't need to convince her of anything in the moment. You just need to plant the idea and let time work on it. Because when someone argues with themselves, the impact is deeper than anything you could force through words. And the man who can introduce that subtle imbalance without needing control, approval, or validation stands apart. Not loud, not dominant, just precise. That precision is what makes your presence linger even after the conversation ends. Because you didn't try to win, you gave her something she couldn't immediately put away. If you want respect in any relationship, your responses can't be chaotic. Most men make the same mistake in two directions. They either tolerate too much for too long, then explode, or they nitpick every small thing and turn the connection into a courtroom. Both destroy attraction because both feel unstable. What works is clean structure. When something crosses a line, your reaction is brief, decisive, and calm. No speeches, no arguing in circles, no emotional bargaining. You simply remove access to you for a while, not as a stunt, but as a natural consequence of what you allow in your life. That creates clarity, and clarity forces people to take you seriously. The other side of this is how you give warmth. Too many men flood a woman with reassurance the moment things feel good, like they're afraid the peace won't last. That turns affection into something expected instead of something felt. Instead, keep your positive energy steady but measured. When she shows effort, respect, and consistency, you respond with something small but real, a bit more attention, a genuine compliment, a moment of closeness. Then you go back to your normal pace. You don't reward everything. You don't overreact to good behavior the same way you don't overreact to bad behavior. That steadiness is the point. People become attached to what feels earned, not what's constantly poured onto them. When rewards are rare and sincere, they land harder. When consequences are immediate and quiet, they teach faster. And the timing matters more than the intensity. A calm withdrawal after a clear boundary break leaves a stronger impression than a long emotional argument, because there's nothing to debate. It's just reality. Then, when things return to normal, you don't rush to make it up with extra attention. You let consistency rebuild trust. That makes the connection feel grounded, not desperate. Most men reverse this without realizing it. They give endless benefits up front, then deliver consequences in messy emotional bursts. That trains the other person to ignore their standards and wait out their moods. But when your warmth is intentional and your boundaries are firm, you become predictable in the right way. Not predictable as in easy, but predictable as in principled. People may not always like consequences, but they respect them when they're fair and consistent. And respect is what keeps a relationship from sliding into games. The goal isn't to keep someone guessing. It's to make your standards impossible to mistake. When your affection is earned, and your absence is a natural result of disrespect, you don't need threats. You don't need control. Your behavior communicates everything. Most men watch what a woman says and miss what she shows. They get pulled in by words, by tone, by surface emotion, and they react to the performance instead of the pattern. But influence comes from attention, not intensity. When you slow down and actually observe, you start noticing the shifts most people ignore, how her energy changes around different people, when her confidence is natural versus when it's forced, when her laughter is relaxed versus when it's used to steer the moment. You don't comment on it right away. You don't interrupt it. You just register it. That alone separates you, because you're not chasing a response. You're reading the room. And then, when the timing is right, you say one simple line, not emotional, not dramatic, just accurate. Something that shows you were paying attention when others weren't. And after you say it, you stop talking. That silence is what gives the moment weight, because now she's processing, not reacting to praise, not deflecting criticism, but replaying what you noticed and wondering how long you'd been seeing it. The power isn't in the sentence itself, it's in the restraint around it. Most men talk too much after making a point, trying to soften it or explain it away. That kills the impact. When you let the observation stand on its own, it lingers. It tells her you're not speaking to impress, you're speaking because you're certain. And certainty is unsettling in the right way. It doesn't demand anything from her, but it shifts the dynamic because now she knows she's being seen, not evaluated, not chased, seen. That creates awareness. Awareness leads to self-consciousness. And self-consciousness changes behavior. You didn't push, you didn't pressure, you didn't ask for anything. You simply reflected something back to her that she hadn't realized was visible. That's why it stays with her. Compliments fade, arguments fade, but moments of recognition don't. They replay quietly because they touch identity, not ego. And when you're the person who triggers that kind of reflection, you don't need to dominate conversations or compete for attention. Your presence already carries weight, not because you spoke louder, but because you spoke less and only when it mattered. Availability feels generous, but too much of it erodes value. When you're always reachable, always responding, always ready to smooth things over, you become part of the background, familiar, dependable, and easy to overlook. What changes perception isn't attention, it's contrast. The moment you step back without drama, without explanation, without a visible emotional charge, the space you leave behind starts working on its own. Not because you vanished to provoke a reaction, but because you didn't cling when your presence was being taken lightly. Silence, used sparingly and with intention, shifts the focus from what you're doing to what you're no longer providing. That absence creates questions, and questions pull the mind inward. She starts replaying interactions, scanning for missed signals, trying to locate the moment things changed. And while she's doing that, you're not chasing clarity, you're living your life at a steady pace. That steadiness is the anchor. If you disappear out of anger or resentment, the effect collapses. It reads as instability. But when distance arrives calmly, it signals independence. It says your world doesn't stop because someone else wavers. Timing is everything here. Distance only carries weight when presence had substance. If your attention was thoughtful, measured, and grounded to begin with, stepping back feels noticeable. If it was frantic or excessive, pulling away feels like relief. That's why restraint matters from the start. When you return, and you do return, you don't rehash, you don't accuse, you don't seek reassurance. You re-enter as you left, composed, direct, unchanged. That consistency tells a quiet truth. You're capable of closeness without dependence. The mind respects what doesn't need to beg for space. This isn't about withholding to gain leverage. It's about knowing when to stop giving energy where it isn't being met. Space recalibrates dynamics because it forces reflection without confrontation. And reflection often does more than arguments ever could. When someone realizes access to you isn't guaranteed, your presence sharpens. Not louder, not colder, just clearer. You don't chase reactions, you allow meaning to settle. In a world where most people overstay, the one who knows when to step back stands out not as distant, but as deliberate. If you want to matter beyond the moment, you can't just be someone she enjoyed, you have to become a point of reference. Most men pass through a woman's life without leaving a trace because they never touch anything real. They entertain, they comfort, they fit in, and then they fade. What stays is impact. The moments that alter how someone sees themselves don't come from effort, they come from truth delivered without need. When you say something that names what she's been avoiding, when you hold eye contact a second longer than comfortable, when you don't rush to soften the moment or make it pleasant, something shifts. Not because you were harsh, but because you were honest without asking for approval. Those moments don't feel dramatic at first, they feel quiet. But later, they echo. She thinks about what you said when she's alone, when she's with other people, when something in her life doesn't sit right anymore. That's because you didn't just interact with her, you interrupted a pattern. And patterns are hard to unsee once they're exposed. This isn't about trying to change her or fix her. It's about being grounded enough to speak clearly and then let the result unfold without attachment. When you don't stay to manage her reaction, your words land deeper. You become associated with awareness, not emotion, with reflection, not comfort. And that's what turns a man into a marker in someone's story. She may not talk about you. She may even minimize what happened out loud. But internally, something moved. A line was crossed that can't be uncrossed. You didn't demand space in her life. You created a shift in how she understands herself. And people don't forget the moments that reframe their inner world. They forget dates. They forget compliments. They forget conversations meant to please. But they remember the moment someone saw past the surface and didn't flinch. When you can be that presence without clinging to the outcome, you stop chasing relevance. You become the reference point. Everything else is measured against, not because you tried to be unforgettable, but because you were real when it mattered. Everything you've heard up to this point isn't meant to impress you. It's meant to recenter you. Because this isn't about lines, tactics, or trying to get a reaction. It's about understanding how presence works when it isn't fueled by need. Most men spend their energy trying to be chosen, saying the right thing, showing the right traits, hoping they're enough. But the moment you stop asking for permission and start moving with intention, the entire dynamic changes. You don't try to hold attention. You become someone attention settles on. You don't chase clarity. You create it through how you act, what you allow, and what you walk away from without resentment. This isn't softness, and it isn't aggression. It's control that comes from self-command. The kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't explain itself, and doesn't collapse under pressure. If something in you shifted while listening, if a quieter, steadier instinct woke up, that's not coincidence, that's recognition. It means you're done operating from urgency and approval. You're ready to move differently. So, here's the line in the sand. If this message connects, leave a single word in the comments. Control. No explanation. No performance. And if you're ready to keep building this mindset, not to win someone, but to stop needing to subscribe. What comes next isn't about getting attention. It's about becoming the kind of man who doesn't have to ask for it.